This is John Goodman. We're recording another exciting video. What are we talking about today? We are talking about the dilemmas that are presented to a listing broker when a seller has surveillance devices, either microphones or recording devices or both in the property. So Colorado has what's called an anti-eavesdropping statute. And what that means is that people are not supposed to listen in on other conversations that other people are having unless they are a party to that conversation. If A and B are talking to each other in Colorado, A can record the conversation without B's knowledge of it. If they're communicating together, then A can record the conversation between A and B, and mostly that comes into play over the phone. But when a seller has surveillance equipment, especially microphones on a property, they are not a party to the conversation. They are eavesdropping. They're listening in on conversations of others. And so that raises questions in the modern world for listing brokers. It's not just an issue that's driven by COVID, although COVID does drive this issue some, because in addition to normal sort of break-in kind of security issues, sellers who are showing their house some sellers want to have an understanding of whether buyers and inspectors and appraisers and stagers who are going into a house are complying with the public health orders. So that is one of the reasons they install surveillance equipment. It's also somewhat driven by technology. Technology keeps reducing the cost of having digital surveillance devices, and perhaps it's even driven by increased concern about crimes and the like. So the first question and all these questions, the theme of all these questions are, does a listing broker need to disclose to people who are going into the property that there is this surveillance equipment about the property? Okay, we'll break that into bits. 5 bits, if you will. Here's the first one. The question about if the listing broker knows. That raises the question, does the listing broker have an obligation to try and find out? Does the listing broker have an obligation to ask the seller, hey seller, do you have any listening devices? Do you have any security cameras? And Colorado has a pretty clear statute for brokers. It says brokers do not have an obligation to inspect a property for the benefit of the seller. And I think that would play a significant role in these situations. Should there be, for example, a buyer who was unhappy that they were listened upon without the consent of the buyer, I think that would play an important role in defending these cases. And so I can't be 100% decisive. And the reason I can't be 100% decisive is the anti-eavesdropping statute is a criminal statute. It was not written with the home selling situation in mind. It does not have any words addressing the listing broker's responsibility at all in the home sale situation. So to some extent, we're making guesses. But no, I don't think a listing broker is compelled to ask the question, hey seller, do you have any listening devices on the property? Having said that, neither should the listing broker ignore red flags. It's sort of like solar panels. You know, solar panels, not always, but generally can be seen from the street. And when a listing broker is going to a listing appointment or first taking the photos or pounding in the sign, whatever they're doing, I think listing brokers have some responsibility to go to the property and look around, and the listing broker, just like the listing broker cannot ignore the solar panels on the roof, I'm making an analogy, the listing broker should ask the seller questions. Do you own those? Do you lease those? If you lease those, is the lease transferable to the buyer? Is there a lien against it, the solar panels? Are you planning on paying that off? Are you planning on paying the lease off? Those kind of questions. Not our main topic, those are analogies. You should do the same thing if you see listening devices, one of those digital doorbells it records, etc. Ask the seller. Do they have this stuff? Then, point number 2, if I'm a seller, I am going to want buyers to know, certainly about the cameras, because the primary purpose of having these cameras is to secure the property. And if buyers, for example, are crooks, knowing about the existence of the cameras might decrease the likelihood that they ever come in. And even if they're not crooks, knowing about the existence of the cameras helps keep the honest buyer honest. And so if I'm a seller, and if I'm driven by security considerations, if I'm driven by public safety considerations, I want the buyers to know about it. Now, so I think what the broker should do is ask the seller, but not beg the seller. I mean, just be presumptuous. Seller, I presume that because you have these security cameras and the like, you don't mind if we disclose this to buyers who enter the property. And same thing with the listening devices. I don't know for sure, don't have enough data on this, but my guess is that a high percentage of the time, whatever it is, 75%, 80%, 85%, the sellers will agree, yes, by all means, we want you to disclose this, and then the uncertainty of the statute is mooted by the seller's consent to the disclosure. Next concept, we're on number 3. It is important to make this disclosure in a way that leaves a record. One of the ways of making this disclosure is to just put it in the MLS remarks. And another way to sort of belt and suspender that disclosure is have the people who handle your showings to have the protocol that a natural part of setting up the showing appointment is to send out whatever confirmation communication the showing system sends. We'll say it's an email, perhaps it's a text, and that email confirms. Permit us to confirm we're telling you that there are listening devices or security cameras or both on the property, FYI. The next question is, what if the seller doesn't consent to you making the disclosure? That's a tricky situation because there isn't any clear law that says you have an obligation to consent. And you have exposure, and perhaps that exposure is being part of a conspiracy to eavesdrop on the buyer's conversations with their brokers. And we'll just have to address those situations on a case-by-case basis. When the seller does not consent for you making the disclosure, we just have to address those things on a case-by-case basis. And maybe by the time it comes up for you, a year and a half after you watch this video, we will have some more clear guidance on that, either from court precedent or from the Division of Real Estate. All right, here's the last point on this. Suppose you just want to have a simple blanket policy, and that is automatically put it in your remarks. There may be listening devices, there may be security cameras, there may be both. Behave accordingly. I don't think that's adequate disclosure if you know, if your listing broker knows, if the working designated broker, seller's agent, transaction broker for the seller knows there are these surveillance devices. I think that works when you don't know, but if you know, I think you have an obligation to disclose what you know. That is everything I have to say on this topic. Remember, we live in a complicated world. Be careful out there, and I'm going to have to add this to my motto, be patient as I turn off the recording.